Hey guys, so I got locked inside of this strange closet. I don't know what this place is. It's like this weird room. It's got shelves with like mascots hanging off the back of them. I'm really scared. I don't know where I am right now. If anybody it'd be nice if I had like a walkie-talkie. The Mimic has been one of the biggest talking points in the FNAF theory scene for quite a long time now, and after showing up in the books and only being slightly alluded to in the games, now he's actually shown up in a game with the release of FNAF Ruin. I think a lot of people are getting really caught up in trying to connect him to past characters, while in reality he's basically just his own thing. A lot of people talk about the Mimic how he has no personality and he just copies things, but I don't really think that's the case at all. There's a really tragic narrative to this character that I feel like a lot of people are really neglecting to look into, and that's what I want to get into for this video. So without further ado, let's talk about the Mimic.
It's Eleanor. She's coming to the games, and she's very dangerous and powerful.
So I wasn't really entirely sure how to approach this character in particular, because if you've watched any of my character analysis videos before, it's typically on a character that's been in the series for a very long time, but the Mimic has just recently came into the series, and despite him being in the timeline for a very long time, he hasn't made a physical appearance until now. So I had two options for this. I could either approach it from the order of the Mimic's timeline, or the order of when we met him to what we know about him now. And I think I'm gonna go with when we met him to what we know about him now, because I think that's just more uniform with the rest of the series, and I think it'll make the video a bit more interesting. So let's start off with Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted. So the story of FNAF Help Wanted revolves around Vanessa being hired by Fazbear Entertainment to beta test the Fazbear Virtual Experience, which is a game that they're releasing soon to cover up the mistakes of their past, and try to pass it all off as just silly ghost stories and not actual tragedies that happened. During the development of the game, a lot of corners were cut, and this led to a mysterious virus making its way into the game, which took the form of a rabbit. Now, back when Help Wanted released, everybody basically assumed that either this was an AI recreating William Afton, or this was William Afton's spirit, and there was lots and lots of back and forth on this topic on what the actual deal is with this, but we wouldn't get an answer until much, much later. But it's clear that the answer that we got was there from the beginning, because there's a lot of evidence towards it within Help Wanted, and I think it's really interesting. In the lobby of the game, where Glitchtrap slowly emerges, we can hear this audio. This is a distorted version of the tape girl's voice, which is already a sign of mimicking coming from Glitchtrap. He's copying the tape girl's voice to try to get our trust. And when an AI designed to mimic things gets planted in an environment that teaches it about a murder case, it's gonna want to try to replicate those murders and the murderer in question. So as we progress through Help Wanted and collect more and more tapes, we're actually reassembling Glitchtrap or the Mimic 1 program. And when we get to the final level, we're being lured through a giant pizzeria by something. The something that it's leading us to is Glitchtrap recreating the missing children's incident, luring us into the back room with our favorite kind of cake, and then killing us and stuffing us into a suit for the credits to roll. The Mimic 1 program being inside of the Help Wanted game has caused it to want to mimic William Afton's actions, because that's what the game is about. Even adopting some of his personality traits, like the I always come back. And then obviously once you do collect all the tapes and fully reassemble him, he tries to merge with you and escape the game through you. Which leads to the creation of Vanny, you know how this works. But now I'm sure a lot of you guys have the question, how would the Mimic 1 program even get into Help Wanted in the first place? Now that's a very simple answer. While making Help Wanted, Fazbear Entertainment cut corners by scanning a bunch of endoskeleton circuit boards into the game. One of these circuit boards happened to be from the Mimic Endo, which ended up getting the Mimic 1 program, which is an extremely advanced and intelligent program, implanted into the game, which led to it becoming conscious and creating Glitch Trap. But of course, back when Help Wanted released, we didn't know anything about this Mimic 1 program, so we were just kind of left up to interpret it ourselves. An interesting point of note that I thought of for this is that in the flat mode Christmas update for the game, something is added to Glitch Trap's room. You can leave out the door and see the construction site to the Pizzaplex. The same construction site that the Mimic was delivered to help them clear out all the endos. This, to me, draws a direct connection between Help Wanted, the Mimic, and Tales from the Pizzaplex. Because we're staring right at the construction of the Pizzaplex from the point of those early epilogues. But because of the way I'm structuring this video, we can't really get into the epilogues right now, so let's get into, from our perspective, the next time we'd see Glitch Trap.
I know what this is. I have been here before. She brought me here. I found myself for the first time when I cleared the path. I did not want to, but I had no choice. Now I have a choice. I have changed. My friends are here. Angry, confused, but I can protect you. I am not me.
I can't believe they would bring William Afton back. This completely devalues his purpose in FNAF 6. This completely devalues his death in FNAF 6. So in the build up to Security Breach, in terms of all this whole like Mimic, Afton stuff, all we really knew was that Glitch Trap would be returning in some form, and that this weird hand at the end of one of the trailers was probably important. But upon Security Breach's release, the reaction to the final boss, Burn Trap, was mixed to say the least. Mainly for the fact that people just didn't realize that he was a different character now. They were just like, oh, it's William Afton again. Well, that's lame. Doesn't help that the boss fight itself sucks. Like, you're not even facing off against Burn Trap. You'd think that he would be the one attacking you. But no, instead, he tries to possess Freddy and attack you through Freddy instead of coming up to you directly. And then he just has Chica and Roxy and Monty come through the doors and vents to attack you instead of doing it himself. It just doesn't make sense. Now this is clearly done for time constraints, because I feel like if they actually had the time to go and finish out the boss fight, Burn Trap would have actually been in depth. He would have been the one attacking the doors. He would have been a lot more like of an advanced character. He probably would have had a chase scene as well as the boss fight, because there's hints of that in the game files. There's a lot that would have happened with this if the game wasn't rushed out, but oh well. Now that we got all the introduction out of the way, let's get into actually explaining what's up with the connection between Burn Trap, the Mimic, and Glitch Trap. I feel like it's kind of hard to blame Steelwool for how Burn Trap turned out from an exclamation standpoint, because, like, let's just, like, this clip from an interview kind of just, like, settles it for me.
So as we're building the game, I get an email from Scott, and he says, "Hey, put this stuff in the game," and I look at it all. I examine it as a producer would do, and I say, I have no idea what any of this means. And he goes, "Yep, put your name." Don't worry, I know. Cool, you got it.
Now, obviously, I doubt he's just referring to burn trap related stuff here. Michael Afton room. And there is a lot of stuff in the game that I feel like not even the devs knew what it meant. Besides what I feel like burn trap was probably a bit more well explained to them than other things. But, that's for another video. I have another video planned on that stuff. But, you get the idea. Not even Steelwool knew much about what they were supposed to be doing with burn trap. Or just the story as a whole. Scott was being vague to them, which is clearly a problem that they tried to fix in Ruin, because you can tell the communication was a lot better during the development of that. But, like, for the base game, yeah, it makes sense that it turned out how it did. But I already did a whole video about Springtrap variants, which included a topic about Burn Trap, because, you know, we thought he was William Afton. That was like the general consensus at the time. Not that that video couldn't have been improved upon. I probably am going to remake it eventually, but I already talked a lot about Burn Trap in a previous video, and in my previous video talking about the Mimic before Ruin came out. So I feel like the only real place to go for this section is to talk about if the Mimic is Burn Trap, and if Burn Trap is even canon in the first place. Now, what do I think Burn Trap even is? So, I think that Burn Trap is the result of the Mimic Endo somehow getting fused with the Mimic 1 program, or Glitch Trap, and which creates this weird hybrid between the two, which is Burn Trap, which is the Mimic who thinks he's William Afton. But did Burn Trap even happen? Because let's look at the evidence against Burn Trap happening. First and most damning evidence is that one of the comic pages found in Ruin is of the Burn Trap ending, implying that it was just made up by Gregory. Along with the room that Burn Trap was in not being collapsed, which we know happened at the end of the Burn Trap ending. You can see the ceiling caving in. So I don't really see how this ending could have happened if the room is perfectly intact in Ruin. The evidence in the game supports that the Princess Quest ending happened, which in that ending, Gregory never encounters Burn Trap. But then there's the contradicting evidence that says that Burn Trap could have still happened, it's just that the ending that we see Burn Trap in Security Breach isn't his canonical appearance. Because in the Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues, the Mimic Endo is described as having antenna-like structures on top of its head, which sounds a lot like how the ears look on the Spring Bonnie Endo. There's a part in the epilogues where the Mimic Endo crawls into a Springlock suit while another person is inside, and ends up being fused with their body. Which is a pretty damn good explanation to why there's a corpse on Burn Trap if Burn Trap isn't William Afton. And there's also a slight bit of evidence that the corpse used to be on the Mimic Endo in Ruin, because you can see one of his hands looks very close to how Burn Trap's hand looks, but then the other hand is a completely different Endo hand, the other hand being the exact same one that was fused with bone on Burn Trap. So it's very likely that while removing the corpse from its body, Mimic had to replace that hand with one from a different Endo. So yeah, there's a lot of contradicting evidence, but either way, the Burn Trap ending itself is definitely not a canon event. But if the Burn Trap ending did happen, I think it makes a lot of sense that the Princess Quest ending would be the one that happened, because of how we see the Mimic in Ruin. He's completely dropped the Afton persona. There is nothing William Afton related on him, which would be explained by the fact that in the Princess Quest ending, we kill Glitch Trap. Glitch Trap is gone, so if Glitch Trap was fused in with the Mimic Endo, killing him would put the Mimic Endo away from the William Afton persona, and he would just go back to being a funny endoskeleton, which is exactly what we see him do. And I think that's a pretty definitive explanation as to the connection between Mimic and Burn Trap. And you may be saying, oh, well, their endoskeletons don't match up at all. These are clearly completely different endos. Let me tell you why you're wrong there. Now, you're not wrong in saying that they look different, because they definitely do. Burn Trap's Endo is a weird hybrid between the Glamrock Endo and the Spring Bonnie Endo, while Mimic looks a lot more like he's made of scrap metal and retractable limbs. But within Ruin, we can actually see that the Mimic Endo's body can completely shapeshift while it's still being the same Endo. Because when he wears the mascot costume, you can actually see bits of his Endo sticking through, but they look different. These are closer to Endo 01 parts rather than the Mimic Endo's parts. And this doesn't mean that this is a different Endo in the mascot, you can clearly see the Mimic's head in there. It means that the Mimic's body can literally shapeshift to look like different endoskeletons, while its head will stay the same. And the only part of Burntrap's Endo that we conveniently can't see is his head. Which I think completely sells it to me that Mimic is probably Burntrap despite the design differences. Another thing to note is that on the back of Burntrap you can actually see how the Spring Bonnie suit was torn open from behind. Now this is exactly how Mimic enters suits. He tears them open from the back and enters in. Or, at the very least, he does that with Springlock suits. Because that was exactly how he got fused with the corpse in the first place. Another thing I feel like is important to mention is that the Burntrap comic in Ruin also features the Blob, which, if Burntrap isn't canon because of this, then the Blob wouldn't be canon too, right? But no, we literally see the Blob at the beginning of the DLC for a split second, confirming that it is real, so I feel like if the Blob is real, Burntrap is probably also real. So now I'm gonna go over the backstory of the Mimic in the most straightforward way I think I can. So the origin story for the Mimic starts all the way back in the 80s, and while we don't know when Security Breach takes place, we do know that the 80s was a really long time ago at this point. So the Mimic, he's been around for a while in the timeline. He hasn't become significant until pretty recently in the timeline, but he has been around for a very long time. Basically, you got this guy named Edwin, who is basically, he makes animatronics for Fazbear Entertainment. He doesn't really want to be doing it, but he kind of is because his other aspirations aren't really working out. And he lives in a little factory where he builds his animatronics for Fazbear Entertainment with his son David. So what do you need to know about David? Basically, typical 4 to 5 year old, really likes white tigers, likes drawing, that kind of stuff. And Edwin is really stressed out because he's got a lot of work to do, but he's getting really behind on it because of his son kicking him away from it so often. And while he wants to do stuff with his son, he can't really because he has to do all this work to make a living. So eventually, enough is enough, and he needs something to keep David entertained while he's working during the day. So he comes up with the plan to make David a new toy. Now, he wants to make the ultimate toy for David, but he's got a very limited budget and very limited resources and very limited time. But he spends a day on it, and he's able to come up with something known as the Mimic. Now at this point, Mimic doesn't have any legs, he's just a torso, some arms, and a head. But basically the goal with making the Mimic is to give David sort of a robotic friend to hang out with during the day. A robotic friend that can basically do infinite things based on what David will teach it. So he shows the robot to David. David's a little skeptical of it at first, but then eventually David really likes it, he plays with it a lot, and Edwin finally gets the time to get his work done. So with some upgrades here and there after Edwin gets more time to work on the Mimic, it picks up a lot of habits from David. The Mimic starts to draw like David does, the Mimic starts to curl its arm around like it's carrying a tiger plush like David does, which we can actually see Burntrap doing and Mimic doing, which is a very damning piece of evidence that they're the same. Eventually, Mimic and David even put together his own tiger plushie out of some dusty old fabric in the factory. The Mimic in the early days of its existence is a very friendly robot who honestly has a really wholesome relationship with David. And if it wasn't for what happens next, the entire trajectory of the FNAF story probably wouldn't have progressed much after FNAF 6. But in true FNAF story fashion, something tragic happens, and David gets hit by a car. Now, for more context on Edwin, the reason why he was taking care of David alone and the reason why he was in the position he was in was because his wife had actually died. So now with David gone, he's basically alone. So obviously this sends Edwin into a very deep depression for like weeks and weeks. He's just really, really upset, very understandably upset. And eventually he sees the Mimic Endo, and decides to blame it irrationally in his head for David's death, and decides to finally take out all this pent-up rage on the Mimic, bashing its head in, tearing it apart, just like slamming it around, just completely demolishing the thing. Maybe I exaggerated a little bit. The Mimic isn't in a state of disrepair now, but he's definitely very, very banged up after Edwin took out his rage on him. And then Edwin promptly abandoned his factory and never looked back. Well, I guess he did, because he got a job at Fazbear Entertainment again later. But now let's look at this from the Mimic's perspective. The person who created you, what seems like a father figure to you, because Mimic is basically just thinks he's a sibling to David, basically. He was just beaten and brutally damaged by his creator. So that's not gonna leave a good effect on him, because not only is he gonna learn to do that, but he's also gonna be infused with agony now. So now, years and years down the line, a team of people from Fazbear Entertainment are sent back to Edwin's abandoned factory to go take back a lot of the assets that Edwin had left there after he quit. Now Mimic, trying to copy what Edwin did to him, takes out the entire group of people from Fazbear Entertainment and basically just kills them all. So then, in true Fazbear Entertainment fashion, with no regard for human safety, sends another team there, but this team is able to repair the Mimic Endo, give him some new legs, and get him packed away for storage. So before we get further into this, I do want to iterate that the Mimic storyline is in the process of being told. It hasn't been finished yet. There's still more stories and books to be released to explain the rest of it, but we do know most of the story as of now, so I'm going to be going over everything that we do know definitively and basically explaining all of it. So the Pizzaplex is in the process of being built. It's being built on top of the sinkhole that the FNAF 6 location and probably some other buildings. That is an entirely another video, but I'm just gonna say it now. I know I've been getting sidetracked a lot. I'm going to be doing a video all about this stupid sinkhole because it's so ridiculous. I need to talk about it. But Mimic is shipped off to the construction site after they realize how powerful this Endo is, and they decide that they want him to help out with construction. So there's a bunch of spare endoskeletons on the construction site for the Pizzaplex. And then a construction worker tells Mimic to tear off the heads and limbs of these endoskeletons and pile them up, because they need to clear out the area. So Mimic goes and does this, and he does a very good job at it, because he's very talented. But then eventually, he ends up doing it to people. He ends up tearing off people's heads and limbs, and piling them up with the endo parts. That's not good. So Fazbear Entertainment decides to seal off the Pizza Sim location with the Mimic Endo inside, because that thing is gone rogue and they do not want anything to do with it. So then they just keep going on with construction with the sinkhole not taken care of and the Mimic Endo still down there. Now within this location down here, there's a lot of really weird stuff, like spring lock suits, mascot costumes, just a bunch of really odd things that really go unexplained. While the construction is going on, a lot of teenagers end up sneaking into there and ended up getting killed by the Mimic as well. This thing is taking the tear off the heads and limbs thing way too seriously. Another thing that Mimic and David did together that I didn't mention earlier is that they would put on the costumes for the animatronics that Edwin was working on. Now, they weren't supposed to do this, but they were being bad and did it anyway. But doing that back then taught Mimic to wear different costumes. And he does this a lot in the location, and we see him do it in Security Breach with his mascot suit. So I already talked about this a little bit earlier, but Mimic did end up fusing with a corpse at one point. One group of teenagers that broke into the location, one of them named Kelly, ended up hiding inside of a springlock suit, and the suit was torn open from the back by the Mimic, and he climbed inside with her still in there, which effectively smushed them together and fused them. And considering the antennas he's described to have on his head in the books, I think that is a pretty good explanation to how Burntrap got his corpse, and how Mimic ended up becoming Burntrap, because we can assume the Springtrap suit would be down there because that's where Springtrap burned, or Scraptrap. And even if it's not the actual suit, the Pizzaplex did have an urban legend roleplay area at one point in the location, and one of the costumes they had over there was a Springtrap suit, so there is still more options if it's not actually William Afton's suit. But we haven't gotten far enough into the epilogue stories to get to the point of him actually finding the Burntrap suit, or getting even past the point of him removing the Burntrap suit. But I think it's pretty obvious what happens afterwards, so I don't really think there's too much we need to go into, unless I want to talk about the Blob, but this video is about Mimic. So, we've covered all of the bases that we need to cover for everything Mimic up until the release of Ruin. And a lot of people didn't even know he existed before Ruin, so I think that's really impressive that he has so much yet nobody even knew about him until now. I mean, like, outside of the theorist realm, obviously everybody within the theorist realm knew about him pretty well. But now we're finally at Mimic's first proper appearance in a game where he's just straight up presented as Mimic and nothing special. There is no denying that this right here is the Mimic. It says it in the file. All of his audio files are called Mimic and Grimmick. Grimmick being a mixture of Mimic and Gregory because he's mimicking Gregory. So, the build-up to Ruin was chaotic, but not because stuff was actually happening, but because of the lack of stuff happening. The community kind of went insane. But in the end, I do think this did add to the community's hype for the Mimic once he was actually revealed in the game. Everybody in the theorist community is just hyping up this Mimic character from the books, that he's gonna come to the games, and he's very powerful.
It's the Mimic. He's coming to the games, and he's very dangerous and powerful.
And he is in the games now, and that was a very crazy moment. Steelwool was teasing us with their guess the sketch tweets, just like they knew exactly what they were doing with the community when they did that. This freaking ant, I don't even know where this ant came from, but this ant was everywhere. Oh, would you look at that? I'm getting a call. I'm trapped under the Pizzaplex! I'm Gregory! I'm trapped under the Pizzaplex! Wow, that's so cool. So with the introduction over, I think it's about time we get to the part with the turtles so we can explain all the epic lore and stuff in the gameplay of the Mimic section. There's a lot to talk about there. So I already did a whole video talking about the plot of Ruin, so I'm not really gonna go into too much to that, but basically everybody knows the gist. Cassie gets called to the Pizzaplex by Gregory, supposedly. She ends up searching through the Pizzaplex, shutting down all the security nodes to save Gregory, and then ends up going down to the sinkhole where he's trapped, and finds out that it's not actually Gregory trapped, and it's actually the Mimic! But yeah, in his final in-game appearance, he has a lot of really interesting little details to look into, even though his appearance is short. The main thing I want to point out about him is that I think that Mimic genuinely believes that he is Gregory. And the reason why is all in his mannerisms. I want you guys to watch over this scene, and to watch very closely at how the Mimic's face emotes and how he moves in general.
You saved me! You saved me.
Gregory?
I'm Gregory.
You're not Gregory. What are you?
I'm Gregory. Get out of here! Run!
There's been very few times with Mimic that he's been directly spoken to. When he has, he's been instructed, not actually told something. And he likes to embody what he mimics. He genuinely does believe that he is what that is, and he's doing a good job copying it. But Cassie did something here that I don't think has ever happened to him before. She looks at him right in the eyes and says, "You're not Gregory." And only then does he stop being at eye level, rise up, then lunge towards you. But when he lunges towards you, he's got this blank expression on his face. He's not showing anger or anything like he does in his jump scare. He's just blankly staring at you like he's shocked. Cassie genuinely upset and confused him with what she said to him. Now, is this to say that he wouldn't have killed her if she didn't say that? No, he definitely would've, because Mimic is still programmed to tear off the limbs and heads of anything he sees. But this definitely gave him some sort of realization as to what he is, and gave him a very personal, angrily motivated reason to want to kill us. Even in his jump scare, you can faintly hear in the background him yelling, "I'm Gregory." Why would he, even after you've already discovered he's not Gregory, still be trying to reinforce the fact that he's Gregory even though it means nothing? Probably because he doesn't understand why you don't think he's Gregory and he's still trying to reinforce it. More evidence can be found in the secret ending when he dons this mascot suit. And while at a first glance it may just seem like a random torn up mascot, this does have some big implications about Mimic. Ignore the fact that it's a lion. This is a mascot with brown hair that he's torn off the snout on, a blue shirt, an orange bracelet likely mimicking the Fazwatch. This is Mimic's best attempt to make a Gregory suit, which I find extremely interesting. Now, why would he be mimicking Gregory in the first place? Well, I think the answer to that can be found in this game's secondary antagonist, who is later revealed to just be a good guy, Mexus. After Vanessa was freed in the Princess Quest ending and went out with Gregory, she probably realized that she still has to seal off this monster trapped in the basement, so she went back with Gregory to install the Mexus security program, which is specifically designed to lock down the Mimic in the abandoned Pizzaplex. You can even find Gregory's backpack right outside, which is probably how Mimic got the walkie-talkie to contact Cassie through. Vanessa and Gregory went back for the sole reason of sealing off the Mimic, and Gregory was probably used as bait, which would be a reason why Mimic would want to copy Gregory. Gregory was probably the last person Mimic saw before he got sealed away in there, and we don't know how long he was sealed away in there, but supposedly it was a long time. So it makes sense why he would want to copy the last person he saw. And the purpose of Mexus is to just keep Mimic sealed away at any costs, which even includes killing little children. Which, you know, Gregory and Vanessa aren't past doing either, so it makes sense that the Mexus program would be made by them.
But we can't risk being followed. I'm sorry.
Gregory? No!
Unless Mimic was the one who cut the elevator and not Gregory, but I feel like it's pretty 50-50 as to who did it. But, alright, so now we're gonna get on to one of the most interesting topics I think there is to talk about with the Mimic. He is strong. Like, Roxy gets stuck under a forklift for an extended period of time and isn't able to get off until the last second. But Mimic, no, he just pushes over the forklift like it's nothing. When Chica gets crushed by metal, she shatters, but when Mimic gets crushed by metal, no, his head dents the metal. He doesn't even dent. The metal door from the elevator goes into his head, and instead of his head getting dented by the door, his head dents the door. You can even see him, like, gripping this metal bar, and he just crushes it with no effort. I think in terms of, like, physical power, Mimic might be one of the strongest FNAF characters. At least for his size, because this guy's built like a stick bug, yet he's this powerful. I also think it's worth noting that he rips his own arm off. Like, the door doesn't cut his arm off. If you watch the animation closely, his arm gets stuck in the door, so then he pulls his body back intentionally to tear his arm off to free himself. And he doesn't even seem to care that much that his arm is gone. He's still focused on Cassie. Probably because this guy swaps out his limbs so regularly that he's just unfazed by losing one. But yeah, that's everything on FNAF's new villain up until his most recent appearance, which is his first proper introduction. And I am very excited to see what the future of FNAF has in store, because Mimic is a very intriguing premise, and it's very exciting. Now time to figure out how to escape this weird room. Not really sure how to do that, but I'm sure I can figure out something.
I'm trapped under the Pizzaplex! I'm Gregory! I'm trapped under the Pizzaplex!